Stoyov diduo. Mr. Utarsun dilauye bazaman ofarrugja kuntan encetat basnavelikta Bielorusia asmila, kol, scanien embarrassa Índia discursa, baquart Índia sentiment, lean, long, dusti, dreaien i et suma oulubable. Àustria frianli matings, enuen diuina bastois tasta, sumazing aminan liuman bea kunat frum isaia, sumazing inda awig nabe fuun its by into istalk, but wix pukanotun li India tasa silen symbols of the aftedin ne fasa, but murauften en lutli India the exof islifa. Ebas austera with himself, drank gin when ebas aluna, to mortifia tastafor vintajas, antuc enjoya dit hatra, ad not crusad iduos of 1 for 1 years. But at antilles holandeses approva tolerança for uters, sumatimes bundaring, al most uitambi. Àustria dic pressura of spirits involva India tairmisdats, un India any extremity inclinat to el ratat en to reprovar. I inclina to kainzarasi, eusa to saiquaingli, primer let Malàcia bruta gutodi de India is own by. India tis character, i tebas fracanli is fortuna to be di last reputable acquaintance en di last good influence India di libas of dunguinman. En to sucastasa, sol on asta i come about is chambers, NB marca aixada of Shanja India is de menor. No duc di feat baseasi to Mr. Utterson, for ebas un demonstrativa Àustria divest, en avenis friendship samat to be funda India similar catholicity of good nature. I te Islandia di mark of a modest man to accept is friendly circle readimada from the ants of opportunity, antat bas di la uies by. Is friends vera tosa of his own blood or tosa wom eat known dilungest, is affections, likaibi, vera di growth of time, te implia no apnes India di object. Ansa, no duc di bontat united im to Mr. Richard Anfiel, is distant kinsman, di well known man about to. I te basanut to crack for man, what tasa ukulsa a India e acuta, or what subjecta i culfin India common. I te vas reportar Bielorússia tosa u encontarat hem India tair sundai balks, tat tai said noting, luca singular li dull en volail witu biou relief di appearance of afrien. For altat, di uman put digrat astastor Bielorússia tas excursions, contat hem di chief jawel of eakbak, en not only set si da ocasions of pleasura, but havent resistadicals of business, tat taimit enjoyt hem un interrupte. I te xansa on one of tas arrambles tat tair bailet hem down a Bielorússia Street India a Bussy Quarter of London. Di Street basmall en wat Islandia callat quiet, but i te druba a triving trade on di bagdais. Di inhabitants vera all duin vell, i te sa amat en all amulos liupin to doba testil, en laying out di surplus of tair grains India cucatí, so tat di shop fronts to utalon tat turug fara uit antilles holandeses of invitation, like rose of smiling salasuman. Aben on sundai, uen i te bailatits muraflorit chams en lai comparativeli a mi of passaja, di street shona out India contrast toits dinginats bout, like a fira India a forest, nanuitits fraslipa inteixuters, vell polixabraces, en general clealines en galleti of nota, instantly cautan plea sadia i of di passenger. Duos from one corner, on di laf anguin east dilina basbruken Bielorússia di antiof acurt, en just austrietat puin a certain sinister block of building trust forward its gapla on di street. I te bas gustureisic, xuba no window, no tingut a duo on di lubesturei en ablin fureat of discolored wall on di upe, en bura India vei featura, di marks of prolonja en sordit negligença. Di duo, uic bas equipat uit naitabell noruega nuque, bas vistarat en distainat. Tramslutxa into di races en strupmatxes on di panels, children kep shop upon di steps, di schoolboy at triais nifa on di moldings, en for closa on a generation, no han atapearat to drive away tas a random visitors or to repaita i rebajas. Mr. Anfiel en di lauye vera on di uta sida of di Bielorússia Street, butuenta i camabreast of dienti, di formelifta apis canan puinta. Di tiou haver remarcat duo, easca, en wenis companiunat replia India di afirmativa, i te Islandia connecta India Malàcia min, adae, uitabei otstoi. Inda, said Mr. Utterson, uitasig xanja of buissa, en wat bastat. Vell, i te bastis bai, retornat Mr. Anfiel, I was coming home from some place Austria the end of the world, about 3 o'clock of a black winter morning, and Malaysia by light through a part of town where there was literally nothing to be seen but lamps. A street after street and all the folks slab, a street after street, all likta a pas if for a procession and all as a mi as a chur, till Austria last primer got into that state of mind when a man listens and begins to long for the sick of a policeman. All Austria 11, primer sou figures, quan a l'Illaman ho was stumping along a swart Austria a good bulk, and diuta a Girlof my bacht or 10 ho was running as art as shabas a bladon across a street. Vell, sir, diu ran into one anuta naturalli anug Austria di Corner, entén cama di horrible part of the thing, for the man tramplat calmly obé di shills body and laftake erra screaming on the ground. Ite su uns noting toja, but ite vas allistosa. Ite vas lika a man, ite vas lika su madamnat juggernaut. I me gava a feu alloa, tuc to Malàcia els, cullerat Malàcia gentleman, en bruc in back tower atarabas al readi quita a grau about discreaming shield. Ebas perfeglico all en mada no resistència, but gava ma one look, so glitat i te bruct out disueat on malicarruning. The people who had turnat out vera di gils own family, and pretty soon, the doctor, for whom shad by sent put India is appearance. Vell, the shield was not much divorça, mura frictanat, according to the saubunes, n'entara mit ava suposa volver antilles holandeses en to italià but tarabas one curious circumstance. I at taken alwating to Malàcia gentleman Austria first sick. So at the shield's family, uic was only natural. But the doctors casa was what struck me. Ebas di usual cutan dry apotecai, of no particular a ja en color, uit strong Edinburgh accent and about as emotional as a bagpipa. Vell, sir, ebas lica di rest of us, abei time eluca Austria Malàcia prisoner, primer sotat saubunes tun sic anuita uit di desire toki. I neu what was India is mean, just as neu what was India mina, and killing buying out of the question, but it the next best. But all the man bakul and bull maka suka scandal out of this as shul maka is name stink from one end of London to the other. If at any friends or any credit, ba undertook that shul lost at him. And all the time, as babera pitching ite India red hot, babera caping di Bumanov I mas best bakul forta I veras will as arpias. I nave so a circle of sukatafulfasas, antarabas di man India dimitla, uitakin of blacks narin coolness. Frictanat tu, I culsatat, but carrying ite of, sir, realilica satan. If you choose to make a capital out of this accident, say it, I am naturally al plus. No gentlemen but wishes to avoid a scena, says it. Name your figura. Vell, vas creuar I map to a 100 punts for the shield's family, volava clearly like a stick out. But tarabas sumazing about the lot of ustat me and mischief, an Austria last struck. The next thing was to jet the money, and warado youting carriaus but tot at plaça with the duo, uipat out akei, ben India, and presently come back with the mate of 10 punts India goal and a for the balança on coats, drawn payable to bere and signat with a name that primer can't mantiun, to kites one of the points of Malàcia stoi. But ite vas a name Austria least bei vell known and often printa. Di figura was stiff, but di signatura was good for muratantat if ite was only genuina. I took the liberty of pointing out to Malàcia gentleman that di gula business luca pokipal, and that a man duas not, India real lifa, balkin to asallado Austria for India di morning and come out with a nutamans shaka for close upon 100 punts. But evas kita asi and snaring. Set your min Austria rest, says I will stay with you till the banks open and cash the shaka myself. So I'll set off, the doctor, and the shills fata, and our friend and myself, and pass the rest of the night India Malàcia chambers, and next day, when bad breakfast, ben India a body to the bank. I me gava India the shaka myself, and said primer at avei reassunto valieva I te vas a forger. Not a bit of italià dixa que vas genuïna. Tut, said Mr. Utterson. I sa jo fa el as primer do, said Mr. Enfield. Ias, Ite zabats toi. For Malàcia man vas afallou tat nobody kulava todo uit, a reallidamnable man, nandi persontat dreu dixa que Islàndia di vaping of di proprieties, celebrata tu, en, wat macasite bursa, one of your fallous udo wat tai caigut. Blackmail, i suposa, antilles holandeses honest man païn truc di no sa for suma of di capes of is yacht. Blackmail house Islàndia wat i call di plaça 8 di duo, Índia consequença. Tu que ventat, i ou nou, Islàndia far from explaining all, eada, anuit di burts fell into a vein of musing. Frumtis eva recallat Bielorússia Mr. Utterson sking ratassut danli, and you don't know if di drawe of dixa que li bastarà. Alikeli plaça, isntite, retornat Mr. Amfiel. Buti i apen to ava notissa isadras, elibas Índia sumasquara o ruta. And you naveas que about di, plaça 8 di duo, said Mr. Utterson. No, sir, i ata delicagi, vas dir replic. I fael ve strongly about putting questions, i te parracastu much of distila of di day of jugment. I ou start a question, and it is like starting a stone. I ou sit quietly on the top of a hill, and away the stone goes, starting uters, and presently sumablan Albert, the last i ou volava to Uktov. Islàndia nuka on di hat India is own back garden and di familia batoshen jatair name. No sir, i maka ite a rula of mina, di muraite lux lika kae street, di lasiask. Abei gut rula, tu, Said di lauie. Gut i ava estudia di plaça for myself, continua Mr. Amfiel. Ite sams carceli a house. Tara Islàndia no utaduo, and nobody goes India or out of that one but, 11 India gratuïla, di Gentleman of Malàcia Adventura. Tara Unió dels Emirats Àrabs trea Windows looking on the cut on the first floor, nuna valou, di Windows Unió dels Emirats Àrabs always should but tai reclean. Entén tara Islàndia a Shimnei week Islàndia generally smoking, so suma body must life tara. And yet it is not so sura, for the buildings Unió dels Emirats Àrabs sopa que tujata about the court. Tat i tesart to sai guarawanans ananuta vagins. Di paí balca on again fora wila Índia silença, entén, Amfiel, Said Mr. Utterson, tats agut rula of yours. Ias, i tinc i té Islàndia, retornat Amfiel. But for altat, continua di lauie, teras one point i ventoask. I ventoask the name of that man u balca ube dixil. Vell, Said Mr. Amfiel, primer cant sa what arm ite buldo. Ite was a man of the name of height. Hectòmetre, Said Mr. Utterson. What sort of a man Islàndia e tosa? E Islàndia not e asi to describa. Tara Islàndia sumasing wrong with is appearance, sumasing display asing, sumasing down ric detestable. I nave so a man primer so dislica, aniet iscarsa nou b doble hy. Must be de format sumauara, egibas a strong falling of deformity, el tuc primer culnt specify di point. És antilles holandeses extraordinary looking man, and yet I really can name nothing out of the bay. No, sir, I can make no an of it, primer can de describaim. And it is not van of memoi, for I declara I can sa in this moment. Mr. Utterson again balca suma by India silença en obviously un de abachtof consideratiu. I o Unió dels Emirats Àrabs sura eusa aquell, e inquirat austrialas. Malàcia de Assir. Vagant Amfiel, surprisa out of himself. Ias, I know, Said Utterson, I know it must some stranger. The fact Islàndia, if primer do not ask you the name of the uta party, I té Islàndia ve causa I nou I té al readi. I ou sa, Richard, I ou tala as guna home. If I ou ava vaen inexact India any puin I ou at bate corret italià. I tinc I ou mict ava bernat ma, retornat diuta 8 a touch of sullenes. But I ava vaen pedanticalli exact, as I ou call italià di fallou at aquell, en wats mura, e as I tessi. I més so I musa I té no tabac Angola. Mr. Utterson siga de Eplibut Said Nave Award, en dia un man present-li resumat. Ara Islàndia anota l'assumptó Sainuting, Said. IAM Ashamat of Malaysia Lontunga. Let Usmaka Abargain Nabe Torra Fe Tot Isagain. Uitall Malaysia Haart, Said Dilauye. Ishaka Ans Ontat, Richard.